Well, hello again. We're glad you're with us today. Thank you for being with us on GPS and God's prophetic surprise. We probably better just explain and introduce everybody here, and then you can tell us your little tale of woe. Anyway, Jon was telling us his little sad story. He was a little painful the last few weeks. But here is Sara. Can you see? Is there a camera angle that will show her foot here for real? So anyway, I called you, last week. Got a male voice on your phone. I said, what's going on, Sara? Because you're not married. And you were at the urgent care. So what happened?
I stepped on a water glass kind of thing, like just a cup, a normal cup. And I stepped on it, and it shattered into my foot. It was beautiful.
It's hard to even think about. And you waited all night?
Yeah, and then I went to bed because I was tired after I got the bleeding to stop after about an hour. And then I decided the next morning I woke up and I was like, yeah, this is bad. I should probably do something about this. And I went and got stitches.
You told me it's this long?
It's about, 2.5, 3 inches.
18 stitches. Mm-hmm. And they found one more piece of glass in there.
I thought I'd cleaned it.
So we've all had our time to lecture Sara. Next time. Anyway, we're sorry.
It's cool.
But the rule was you're supposed to be in bed.
Yeah.
But off your feet, so someone drove you to be here today. So we're glad. But we don't want to do it without you. All the people that email me, when they email me, it's Pastor Sara.
No.
So we don't want to do this without you. So thank you for being here.
Well, 2 lessons here. Number one is don't try this at home. Don't do what she did.
Don't relax.
And the other lesson is, now I've forgotten.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good things we can take away from this.
Within a few days, the stitches will be done. It'll all be okay. Yeah. So far, no damage long term. You should be able to have full function and go snowboarding.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're glad you're here with us as we launch into a few verses that had to do with suffering. So I had another story I was going to bring until I knew that we could show that picture from this weekend. I'll just quickly, I don't know if you know this story. I could use a name and you would maybe know. We have a woman who has been a wonderful teacher in a preschool, but ended up with a job that wasn't very good, and all of a sudden she got the job of her dreams at a wonderful preschool, and they were willing to invest in a class that would allow her to be one level up, be a lead teacher in a school. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. $5,000, school pay for the whole thing, but she has to go on Saturday or she'll fail. One Saturday a month. She has offered to have someone take all the notes. She has offered to have someone sit there with the camera and she would watch all of it. She has offered to do any other work in any way, shape, or form. And as of Saturday night, when she called me, just now, I wrote a letter in support of her, as we do, and just can't do it. Besides not getting the position and the class, all the money that they have sent, unrefundable, and she has to pay it back. And they're really struggling. 4 kids, the kids, going through school. One was in Brazil with you. And she's in tears because she wants this so badly. And yet the system doesn't allow that for you. And our passage is here, how long will you have to suffer when it's not your fault? When you're suffering for your beliefs, suffering for being good, suffering for doing the right thing. And they cry out, the souls from under the altar. Say, how long are you going to let this go on, God? When if your heart is right, and she said that, I have never gone against the Sabbath in my life. I have stood for this. They have raised 4 kids with very low income and moved them all through our schools. One will be in Loma someday. He's pre-med at La Sierra now. We could substitute 1,000 stories of people who are listening right now, who are going through things that are not their fault.
Sometimes you suffer because of your own mistakes. I'm sure you didn't intend to step on the glass, so that's simply a mistake that one makes.
But you can't blame anybody. It's your
totally my fault.
But sometimes you suffer for no reason.
Yeah.
Because of an evil situation or an evil person. Yeah. So, fifth seal.
That's where we are. Should we read
about
it?
that kind of suffering where people have suffered because of the gospel.
Someone else.
Yeah.
Well, let's at least read it. If you have a Bible or phone with you, open up this passage, and then let's see. There's a lot in this passage. So Revelation 6, the verses are 9 to 11. Let's just read that real quickly. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. I can remember flipping channels one night and ended up with this PBS movie on God on Trial. Have you seen that? Either one of you seen that?
I don't think so.
You should find that. So it covers all these issues. You know, of course, as Jews, they felt that they had a covenant with God, that God was going to bless them, and that they were the ones following the truth. And now they're in one of the camps, I forget which one, and half of them are going to die tomorrow, but they don't know which ones. So they put God on trial. And they put a chair there, okay, and they made, God, you come here. You're the defendant. There was a prosecuting attorney, and there was a judge. They're all in those green and white striped clothes, you know. And it just becomes an hour and a half of gripping drama as they wrestled with this issue. How long? We're your people, God. We took your name. We have suffered for you for thousands of years. They probably didn't know about the 6 million because they were in the middle of it. We know now about the 6 million. But that's in Somalia, and that's in refugee camps, and that's in churches and in places all over the world. Our church in Baghdad, my friend built that church. That's gone, you know, that's gone. And you say, God, how long? How long? You're in a healthcare place where every single person walking through the doors probably said, this isn't right. You know, I shouldn't have to go through this. So we're going to go here. How long?
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very important piece. But it starts out under the altar.
Yeah.
So what do you know about altars? What altar is this? What are the options?
I assume it's symbolic. It wouldn't have everybody dead under one altar. So I'm assuming symbolic.
Well, in the tabernacle, there were 2 altars.
So burnt offering out in the courtyard.
Yeah.
Altar of incense inside.
Okay.
Not counting altar, not altar of the covenant, it's Ark of the Covenant.
Ark of the Covenant is not called an altar.
So not an altar.
Yeah.
So just the altar of burnt offering.
Yeah.
Altar of incense.
Yeah. So, what do you tell your friends about altars, Sarah? When you talk about this whole system, sacrificing sheep and stuff, how does your generation relate to that?
I don't think they really do relate to that. Like, honestly, I mean, when I think of altars, all I think is like burning things on top of it like a weird stove, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really picture much space underneath it because you don't want to put anything underneath it because it's hot.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, that's pretty much all I think we've ever talked about is like, how did they make it work? But other than that, nothing deep.
Well, in the Hebrew sanctuary, the altar of burnt offering was outside the sanctuary itself. And that was the place where they would sacrifice animals. They would burn the carcasses. They would add incense to the carcass. But they'd do one more thing. As the animal was dying, they'd collect the blood. I'm not sure exactly how you did this. I once attended the Samaritan sacrifice, which is still going on in the West Bank part of that we hear about, and with the Palestinians and so on. So there's a section there where Samaritans live, and they still do the sacrifice for Passover every year. And so the animal, the throat is slit, and the blood comes pouring out, and they collected the blood in a bowl. Not the Samaritans, it was a little messier than that perhaps, but they collected the blood and they poured it out at the base of the altar. It was kind of a sink there, and the blood would go down. So that's the altar of burnt offering, but then there's a second altar inside the temple, and that's where you take the incense, and the incense burns inside of the temple. So the question is, which altar are we talking about here?
Chapter 8 would be the altar of incense.
The altar of incense is clearly in chapter 8, yeah. But is this the altar of incense? Many commentators think so.
Because?
Well, because it's the one they know about. Not quite sure what else to do with it, but I think this is definitely the altar of burnt offering. Why? Because something happens at the base of that altar. You're right. You know what's going on underneath? Well, next to the altar, you had this sink where the blood was poured into. Mm-hmm. So that's the only altar where something happens underneath it. The altar of incense doesn't say anything about anything happening underneath. So that tells me this is the altar of burnt offering. And so Sarah's looking at me kind of like, who cares? Right?
So if Jesus,
Possibly.
Probably.
so if the altar represents Jesus and his sacrifice, and Jesus died for everybody, there's a connection between Jesus and all the souls there. Is there?
Okay, so you've got souls under the altar. Are they alive? Are they dead? Is this the altar of burnt offering or the altar of incense? Is this on earth or is it in heaven? These are all questions that people throw around.
If you're avenging their blood, I would guess that they're dead.
Yeah. Well, there's a parallel text that's interesting, and that is Revelation 16, verse 6. Revelation 16, verse 6, I think, is helpful here.
Gross.
Because it says, I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, you are just in these judgments, you who are and who were the Holy One, because you so judge, for they have shed the blood of your saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink as they deserve. Now, that's where the gross came from, right?
Yeah.
All right, but the important thing is shed the blood. In the original language, it's actually poured out. You've poured out the blood of the saints. In other words, as they were killing God's people, they were pouring out the blood. In other words, they were seeing it as a sacrifice. When people kill other people for religion, do they think they're doing something evil? No. When the Crusaders murdered everyone in Jerusalem, do they think they were doing something good?
Yeah.
Well, here's the interesting piece. If you go back to John 16, Jesus actually spoke about this. John 16, verse 2. He says, they will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, a time is coming when anyone who kills you will think he's offering a service to God. And the language, the original language there is offering sacrificial service to God. So they will think that this murder, this persecution is actually as important to God as if they were doing sacrifice in his honor.
Like Paul and Saul.
This is the dark side of religion. Religion is a very positive thing. It's what human beings do when they experience the presence of God. So God came and talked to me here. Well, I'm going to make an altar here in the shrine because this is where God spoke to me. And so call it, the temple of God spoke to me or something like that. But the challenge is that when people make a religion to honor something that God did, over time, they become more obsessed with maintaining the religion than with the original thing that God actually did. And so religion can now be more about us. And people don't even notice that they made that switch.
Right.
So the dark side of religion is that it can justify things that we would otherwise say gross. Just like you said, you read that and said gross. They poured this out, This is a terrible thing.
Right.
And then God says, okay, you're going to get the consequences of what you did. And in that plague in Revelation 16, the waters are turned to blood like back in Egypt. And the people who were murdering God's people end up, their water turns into blood. So that's, the punishment fits the crime.
Right.
Is kind of what's going on there.
I had a phone call from a high church leader. Detail doesn't matter. And I took him to task for some stuff. He called me about something. I said, as long as I have you on the phone, what about this?
Yeah.
And he had done some very rough public things against people that he disagreed with. And if I gave the name, you would all know exactly what I was talking about. And I said, can't we stick to the high road? Do we have to keep calling out people and putting out press releases against people and all this? Can't we just preach the truth and lift up the truth, and the errors will fall away of its own centrifugal force? He said, we stick to the high road, but if it doesn't work, then we go to the low road. Now, low road can be public shame in that case, but it could also be martyrdom. And we feel like we have to do it in order to protect and preserve the institution of the church. Jesus dying for it's not enough. Some other people are going to have to die for it.
But see, I think this is where my struggle with religion is, and I think where a lot of my friends come into the struggle with religion as a whole is that, like you said, we get so caught up in the rules of a religion that we forget why we're in it. And it drives me nuts as a pastor to have to tell people, yeah, you have to stay in this religion. So like I have that as a challenge just because sometimes I don't think it's healthy for them because they get so caught up in all the laws and the rules and pointing out, well, that person messed up, so I'm not sticking around for this, like, or you're the shame of the church because you don't 100% agree with something. But we all have different realities and different life paths, and I know that sounds really hippie, and I'm not saying that we need to like abolish tradition or religion. I'm just saying I think we lose focus so quickly and we become about rules because that's the only thing we can uphold as opposed to caring about the people behind it. And I think Jesus made it very clear once we hit the New Testament that it's not so much about the religion or the walls, it's about your relationship with God. And I think he tore down the walls of the church and he had to refocus everyone in that concept and that process, saying like, you're missing the point once more. Like, you're all great people. You've been doing what you've thought was right, but you're actually incorrect. This is the path. This is the face of God right here. And I think it's scary for people, but I think if we don't start doing that, we're going to end up back in some kind of crazy stuff, you know, like trying to like bring everything back to center. And I don't know.
Are these all people who suffer throughout history in the name of church, religion?
You mean these souls under the altar?
Or is this a particular group?
Well, we have to go a little bit deeper into it.
I want to make sure that we get somewhere here in this one show.
But I want to point out the altar burnt offering. You have a sacrifice there. But the interesting thing about it is incense is added to that.
Right, so it doesn't smell
What's the
so bad.
significance of that?
Because it stinks. And they need to add some.
It makes it smell better. Well, if it stinks, why does God command it? Why does God command something stinky? Isn't it because God actually hates killing, hates sacrifice, hates the spilling of blood?
He says
and all of that. Then why does God command it?
I don't know. I honestly have always struggled with the process of sacrifice throughout the Old Testament because it seemed polar opposite of what I was reading God's like character to be.
Well, in the book of Hebrews, the author there says the sacrifice never did amount to anything. Never forgave anybody. You know. So what are we doing here?
I'll take a shot at it, and then you react and go where we should go. Is that God uses a substitutionary process to teach other realities about how horrible sin and leaving him and going against life, what that will cause. And rather than you experience it, he experienced it vicariously by another doing that, and hope that we'll learn from this horrible suffering.
So you're saying it's a teaching device.
A teaching device.
And that sometimes we have to face to face. I'm sure, Sarah, you'll be much more careful in the future when you're going around in bare feet as to what is on the floor.
And the rest of us will, who have heard the story.
Absolutely. You see, so sometimes the experience of something very negative, very smelly, very messy, or something like that, it gets our attention to say, hey, that's not a direction that is particularly helpful.
Yes.
But with the incense piece, putting the incense onto the sacrifice, it tells you the sacrifice isn't good enough. Right there was in the ancient context, God says, I'm giving you this, you need this, but I don't want you to ever depend on it. And I think often people do. They depend on the rituals. This is what you've been talking about. Depend on the rituals of the religion to somehow fix stuff. And yet the reality is none of that fixes anything. What matters is the attitude of our heart toward God. That's what really matters. And if God can use something stinky to help us to think, whoa, I need to turn around where I'm going. Where I am is not going to take me anywhere. He'll do that.
But then why would he request people to do the sacrifice in the first place? Is it just a teaching method? I mean, granted, if I had to murder a cute lamb every single time I messed up, I would probably be a way better human being.
There you go.
But at the same time, like, that's a lot of murder or killing of things in order for, that's unfair to them. Like, what did they ever do? And so, like, in that sense, it doesn't make any sense to me.
And one thing to keep in mind is when you look at the temples in the Bible, they're modeled directly on temples we know from archaeology that are older than the Mosaic tabernacle. So God is, to a degree, adopting a cultural expression of religion to help connect with people. It's what they can handle. It's what they can understand.
Interesting.
Well, tie this together as soon as you can, Jon, so the people who don't have to wait till next week to get general direction. Where are we going with this? What is the altar, and how does it relate to these souls and martyrs underneath? Where are we with this?
Well, first of all, I think there'll be questions in people's minds. Are these in heaven or on earth? Are they alive or are they dead? If you remember Abel, it says his blood cried out from the ground. Now, was the blood alive? No. Was Abel alive? No. But what God was saying, it was a metaphor. He's saying that the shedding of Abel's blood cries out to me. I hurt because of what happened to him. So here you have the same time, these souls crying out. They're not alive. They're not in heaven. And how do we know that? Because the altar of burnt offering represented what God was doing on earth. The altar of incense is part of the heavenly tabernacle, but this is an earthly altar. This is the martyrs. What happened to them matters to God. That's what this is telling us.
If they were in heaven, they still wouldn't be calling out for how long?
Yeah, because clearly it tells us in Revelation 24, we should maybe look at that text. In Revelation 24, 20 verse 4, not chapter 24.
I was like,
we'll be looking at that for a long time. But chapter 20 and verse 4, it says, I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge the souls of those who had been beheaded because of the testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image, not received his mark on their foreheads. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So here it tells us that there's a millennium coming in which the martyrs will be raised and participate in that. So these souls under the altar are not people alive now. They are people who at the time here are people who had lost their lives. They're sleeping in the graves and stuff. But what happened to them really matters to God.
Are these all people who have died that way since Revelation was written? Is my father included in this at all? I mean, who all? Is this a timeless thing, or is this a particular time?
Well, if you go on in the text, these voices are portrayed as saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?
So he hasn't judged yet.
So the time period here is before the end time judgment. So this is between the cross and the second coming. And I would understand, one way to read this is the four horsemen have kind of portrayed the tragedy of the whole Christian era, the whole era that is being referred to here. And now you come to a point where there's been an awful lot of suffering, but the judgment hasn't come, the second coming hasn't happened, and everybody's kind of like, how long is this going to go on?
Yeah.
It's the question that we all ask, and in a sense that therefore it's universal. This question is asked over and over in the Psalms, if we had more time to read them. Psalm 79. several times, how long, O Lord? Habakkuk, he says, how long, O Lord, are we going to suffer Babylonians and everybody else just persecuting us? How long? Prophecy, Daniel 8:13. How long is all this suffering going to go on? He says, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Now, I understand that to be saying that in that given period of time, the end time judgment would begin. God would begin to deal very directly with these things. So you can see this in a general sense. To how long is the question we all ask with suffering.
So it's not necessarily people who get killed, in our fire at the burn at the stake. These could be anybody that dies in the faith of Jesus.
Well, the specific thing here is those who are martyred because of the gospel, the word of God,
For the word of God,
testimony of
testimony.
Jesus. So this is specifically focusing on the martyrs.
This is not my dad walking on a sidewalk and a truck kills him and he's dead.
Well, I think it has implications for that, but that's not the focus of the text. The focus of the text here is specifically on suffering that comes without deserving, simply because of the gospel. How do you explain that? I served you all my life, and then they take me and kill me, and you let it happen.
John the Baptist, like that.
Yeah, things like that.
Interesting.
So this is a powerful description of human suffering as a consequence of their beliefs.
Is it legitimate to look forward to this? I mean, they're waiting for that to happen someday. Someday God's going to make this all right.
Yeah.
Is it, I know we don't have much time, is it righteous when you're suffering to hope and believe that someday God is going to rescue you, vindicate you, and do to them what they're trying to do to you?
If he doesn't rescue you, then you're stuck in this situation forever. So a rescue is called for. I mean, in an unjust world, justice can only happen through judgment. And, the Bible is saying that what is happening now is not the way it's always going to be. That there will be a judgment, and God's going to turn things around. God's going to set right the things that were wrong. He's going to undo the damage that was done to you. If necessary, if the people who perpetrated horrible things don't repent, don't change, they're not going to have a part in God's new era because they would ruin it there as well. So judgment is setting things right that have gone wrong. And somebody once said that for the Israelites, judgment was not a negative thing. He says they were suing and they were winning damages. So judgment was positive for the ancient Jews.
You still believe it? You've been preaching it for 40 years?
Yes.
Still believe it?
Yeah, the length of time clearly is going to be way longer than we'd like.
And that's part of the point.
That's part of the point.
That they're
The point of the text.
waiting for this to happen, but someday it's still going to happen. But wondering is part of the process.
Yeah.
Wow, I can hardly wait to go on with this, but the clock comes to an end. Please find our slot next week. We will go on. One of the great passages here as we wrestle, and there's a number of other issues we've got to deal with on this. So find us, and we'll be here together on GPS. Thanks for being with us today.